They believed her nothing more than a housekeeper in a mended grey dress, a woman kept on out of charity, too plain and too quiet to matter. But on the afternoon, the Sloanes gathered in the drawing-room of number 7, Wilton Crescent, to sign away the last of the Ravensworth name. A brougham bearing a ducal crest turned in from the square, and every soul who had spent 2 years wiping their boots on her could not, all at once, lift their eyes from the carpet. If you believe that a person's worth is not measured by the title before their name or the cut of their gown, please take a quiet moment to subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling us which city or country you are watching from tonight. Your presence helps keep these forgotten voices of English history alive. Now, let us begin. The house at number 7 had been sold in the spring of 1872, and the woman who had once owned it stayed on to scrub its floors. Nobody at the agency thought this strange. Great houses changed hands in those years, the way weather changed over the Thames. A shipping fortune here, a railway settlement there, old blood folding quietly into debt, while new money moved into the rooms and hung its own portraits on the picture rails. The Ravensworth family had held Wilton Crescent since before the Crescent had a name worth speaking. Now the brass plate by the servant's entrance read Sloane, and the woman who answered to the name Mrs. Hartley kept the household books, aired the linen, and said yes, madam, in a voice so level it might have been carved from the same cold marble as the entrance hall. She was, by the reckoning of the below-stairs staff, somewhere near 45, grey coming in at the temples beneath a plain white cap. Hands that had clearly done work, though the housemaid Prudence once remarked, over cold mutton in the servants' hall, that Mrs. Hartley's hands moved wrong, that she folded a napkin the way a lady folds a fan, and poured tea as though she had spent her whole life being poured for rather than pouring. Prudence was 17 and given to fancy. The others told her to hush and eat. Augusta Sloane had bought the house, the furniture, and she believed the household entire, for a sum her late husband's cotton mills in Lancashire had made 3 times over. She was a broad, handsome woman of 51 who wore her wealth the way a sentry wears a bayonet, forward and glinting, and daring you to come near it. Her husband had died, leaving her one daughter, Cordelia, 22, and one consuming purpose, to see that daughter married into a family whose name appeared in Debrett's without an asterisk beside it. Cotton money could buy a house in Belgravia. It could not buy the thing Augusta wanted most, which was the certainty that when she entered a room, the people already in it were glad she had come. That certainty had a price, and the price had a name. The Honourable Bertram Thorncroft, second son of a viscount, a young man with excellent tailoring, an indifferent chin, and £40,000 of gambling debt that his family prayed nightly some heiress would consent to marry. The arrangement was nearly settled. The Thorncrofts would lend their name, the Sloanes would settle the debts, and Cordelia Sloane would become, in time, the Honourable Mrs. Thorncroft, and Augusta would at last be mother to a lady. The papers were being drawn. The banns were as good as read. All that remained was the drawing-room ceremony of it, the signing, the toasts. The moment Augusta had rehearsed in her mind on 100 sleepless nights, when the old world would open its door and let her walk in through the front. Mrs. Hartley polished the silver for that occasion herself. She had a way of moving through the house that unsettled Augusta, without Augusta ever being able to say why. The housekeeper was never insolent. She was never anything a mistress could correct. She simply carried herself, in her own kitchen and passages, as though the walls remembered her, as though she were not serving in the house, but tolerating those who had come to live in it. Once, early on, Augusta had found her standing quite still in the long gallery, looking up at the row of dark oil portraits the sale had left behind because nobody had wanted them, and Augusta had said sharply, "Have you nothing to occupy you, Mrs. Hartley?" And the housekeeper had turned and said, "A great deal, madam," and gone. And Augusta had stood there afterward feeling obscurely that she had lost something in the exchange. The Ravensworth portraits stayed on the walls. Augusta meant to have them taken down and sold. but there was always some more pressing expense, and so the dead old family looked down on the living new one all through that long year, and Mrs. Hartley dusted their frames on Tuesdays. Into this house, in the autumn of 1871, came a scullery maid named Nell Crabtree, 16 when she was hired, and therefore, by the December our story turns upon, 2 years on and newly 18, no longer a child in the eyes of any law or any master that mattered. She had been taken on under the last of the Ravensworth stewards in the months before the sale, and kept on afterward by the Sloanes because a scullery maid already trained is cheaper than one who must be, and so she had scrubbed the same flags for 2 households and been invisible to both. Nell had a widowed mother in Whitechapel who took in washing and coughed through the winters, and a younger brother apprenticed to a wheelwright, and a debt. The debt was the thing. Nell's mother had borrowed against the coming quarter's washing to pay the apothecary when the cough turned to something worse, and the man who lent the money was not a gentleman, and the sum owing stood at £4, 11 shillings, and 9pence, a sum that to Augusta Sloane was the cost of a middling hat, and to Nell Crabtree was the difference between a roof and the street. Nell earned it back a shilling at a time, and she was close that autumn. Close enough to count it. Cordelia Sloane found this out, as young women of her particular temper always find such things out, and she made it her sport. Cordelia was not stupid. That is the first thing to understand about her, because it is tempting to make the cruel ones stupid, and it flatters us falsely. She was quick and observant, and she had learned from her mother that the surest way to prove you belonged among the quality was to treat those beneath you as the quality did, which is to say, as furniture that could weep. She had spent 2 years watching real ladies to learn the trick of it, and she had learned the wrong lesson perfectly, that contempt, delivered coolly, was the very accent of breeding. "You still smell of the scullery, you know," she said to Nell one morning on the back stair, when the girl was carrying up the coal. "Bertram's people are coming Thursday week. I'll thank you to keep to the lower passages while they're in the house. It quite spoils a room, coming upon something like you in it," Nell said. "Yes, miss," and carried up the coal. She said yes, miss, a great deal that autumn. She said it when Cordelia inspected her hands and pronounced them fit only for emptying slops. She said it when Cordelia, in front of the visiting Thorncroft cousins, asked loudly whether the girl could even read, and answered her own question. No, of course not. One can see it in the vacancy of the face, while the cousins tittered into their gloves. She said it, or tried to, on the December evening when Cordelia knocked the coal scuttle from her hands on purpose, sent the coal scattering black across the entrance hall marble, and stood over the kneeling girl and said, "Well, clean it. That is, after all, the one thing God saw fit to make you for." Mrs. Hartley was on the gallery landing above, and she saw the whole of it, and she did not move. That was the thing the staff could never make sense of, afterward, when they tried to. The housekeeper saw everything and permitted everything. She let Cordelia strut. She let Augusta issue her small daily humiliations, the wages docked for imagined breakages, the references withheld as a standing threat, the way Augusta had of speaking about the servants in the third person while they stood before her, as though they could not hear or did not signify. Mrs. Hartley watched it all with those level grey eyes, and said yes, madam, and at once, madam, and the staff decided she was either a coward or a woman, so ground down by service that nothing was left in her to rise. They were wrong on both counts, but they could not have known that, not yet. What Mrs. Hartley did do, quietly, was this. She found Nell in the scullery the night of the coal, when the girl's hands were still black and her face was still wet, and she said, "How much do you owe?" Nell, startled, told her. "And how much have you set by?" Nell told her that £2–3 and some odd shillings, hidden in a tin behind a loose brick in the area wall, a shilling and 6pence a week, toward a debt that grew faster in winter than she could feed it. Mrs. Hartley was quiet a moment. The scullery smelled of lye and cold ash, and the tallow of the single candle. Somewhere above them a long case clock struck 11. each note travelling down through the sleeping house. "Do not despair over £4, the housekeeper said at last. "I have seen men lose 40,000 and dine well the same night. The world is not arranged fairly, Nell, but it is not always arranged the way it looks, either. Keep your tin filled, and keep your dignity, which costs nothing, and is the only thing in this house they cannot dock from your wages." She paused at the door. "Say nothing of this." Nell did not understand her, but she filled the tin, and she kept her dignity, and she said nothing, and she watched the housekeeper go up the dark stair with a candle held level in a hand that did, indeed, now that she looked, move wrong, move like a lady's. The reader may wonder why a duchess should submit to 2 years of it. It is a fair question, and it deserves an honest answer, because a story that makes its heroine a saint who simply endures is a lie about how endurance actually works. Isolde Ravensworth did not stay in that house out of humility. She stayed out of 2 harder things, necessity and something very like a hunter's patience. When Edmund Ravensworth died in the spring of 1872 face down, the physicians agreed to say, of a seizure. Though the empty decanters told a plainer story, he left his widow a situation that took Mr. Ashworth 3 days at Lincoln's Inn merely to describe. There was the title, which was hers and unassailable. There was the house in Wilton Crescent, mortgaged past its worth. There was a wreck of an estate in Surrey called Rosemere, its farms let go to ruin, its timber sold, its tenants owed repairs the late Duke had pocketed the rents against, and there was debt not £4, but something on the order of 11,000, owed to tradesmen and moneylenders, and one particular gentleman at a card table in St. James's who was not the sort to forgive it. A lesser woman, or a more comfortable one, would have retired to a widow's cottage on whatever the vultures left her, and lived out her years quietly poor and quietly titled, which is a thing the world permits duchesses to be. Isolde Ravensworth chose otherwise. She sold the Belgravia house herself, through Ashworth, to the highest bidder, who proved to be a Lancashire cotton widow named Sloane, in a hurry, advised by a solicitor too eager to close, to read the small clauses, and into the sale she wove that single, quiet reservation. The right of preemption, the right to buy the house back at the same price within 5 years. Ashworth had argued against it. It tied up money she did not have against a future she could not guarantee. She had overruled him with one sentence: "I am not finished with that house yet, and I do not think it is finished with me." Then she used the sale money, and the sale of everything at Rosemere that could be sold without selling the land itself, to begin paying down the £11,000 pound by pound over 2 years, the same slow arithmetic of survival that Nell Crabtree was working in the scullery with her shillings, only the sums were larger, and the shame, if anything, was worse, because Nell had never had far to fall and the Duchess had fallen the whole height of England to get there, and she took the situation as housekeeper in her own former house. That was the part Ashworth could not talk her out of, and could never entirely understand. She told him it was economy, that a widow settling a great debt could not afford to keep herself in idleness, and £11 a year. And her keep was £11 a year, and her keep. That was true, as far as it went. But it did not go the whole way, and they both knew it. The whole way was this: she wished to know who had her house, and what they were, and how the people under her old roof were used by the people who had bought it. Call it curiosity. Call it a duchess's arrogance, that she could not quite let her walls go to strangers unwatched. Call it, most honestly, a woman with nothing left but a name and a grudge, deciding to spend both wisely rather than fast. So she watched. And what she saw over those 2 years was an education in what money does to people who have just enough of it to reach for something money cannot buy. She watched Augusta Sloane try, that first summer, to be received. There was a garden party in June of 1872, not at number 7, but at a great house 3 doors down, whose owners the Sloanes had determined to know. Augusta engineered an invitation the way a general engineers a siege, through a dressmaker she and the hostess shared, and she went in pale green watered silk with a parasol that had cost 11 guineas, And she took Cordelia, and she came home after 2 hours and did not speak for the rest of the day. The Duchess, who as housekeeper had helped dress her that morning, saw her return and understood the silence perfectly, because she had spent 30 years inside the world that had just closed its face against Augusta Sloane on a lawn in Belgravia. The quality had been perfectly civil. That was the cruelty of it. There had been no cut direct, no turned back, nothing a woman could complain of. There had only been the 1,000 small frequencies at which the old world tells the new one, time's not you, not yet, not ever. The conversation that closed a half-inch as she approached, the introduction that never quite came, the way a countess had looked at her 11-guinea parasol, and then, very slightly, away. Augusta had stood on that lawn among people who would take her money for a subscription or a charity ball, and would never, whatever she paid, take her arm, and she had understood at last that there was a door and that she was on the wrong side of it, and that all her cotton mills in Lancashire had bought her only the privilege of standing close enough to see the door and not go through. She came home and she looked, that evening, for someone smaller to be large in front of, and she found the scullery maid, and she docked Nell 3 shillings for a chipped plate that Prudence had chipped, and she felt, the Duchess saw it in her face, very slightly better. That was the pattern, repeated through 2 years in 100 variations. The Sloanes reached up and were, gently and unanswerably, refused, and having been made small by the world above, they made themselves large upon the world below, and the world below was Nell and Prudence, and Mrs. Dunmore, and, unknown to any of them, a duchess in a mended dress who wrote it all down in a private ledger in a locked drawer and paid, in her own patience, the interest on a debt of a different kind. She corresponded with Ashworth in secret all the while. Letters left the house folded inside the grocery orders and came back the same way, and in them the £11,000 came slowly down 9, then 7, then 4, and the pre-emption clause sat ticking toward its date, and Ashworth's letters grew, month by month, less anxious and more grimly satisfied, until in the November of 1873 he wrote a single line she kept, "We shall clear the last of it before the year turns. After that, your grace, the timing is yours to choose." She chose the day of the signing. Of course she did. She had known for a month that the Sloanes meant to buy themselves a viscount's son that Thursday in December, and she let them make every preparation, let Augusta rehearse her triumph down to the last toast, let the good silver come out and the Sevres come down, and she polished the silver herself and said yes, madam, and waited, because she had learned the one thing her whole gilded, useless class had failed to teach her, and her ruin had taught her instead, that the surest revenge is not to strike the blow but to be standing quietly in the room, having done all the work already, when your enemy strikes theirs, and it lands on nothing. There was one more thing before Thursday, and it mattered, because it was the thing that decided the Duchess would not merely leave, but would make the leaving public. It happened the week before, in the entrance hall. Cordelia had been drilling the staff on the reception of the Thorncrofts, and she had come upon Nell polishing the newel post, and she had decided to be witty. "Do you know," she said, loud enough for Augusta on the stairs to hear, "what you owe, Crabtree? £4 and pennies. Bertram loses that at a single hand of cards, and does not trouble to remember it by morning. That is the difference between his sort and yours, that a sum which is your whole life is not even his amusement. You were born to owe. It is in you like a colour. When they hang the pictures Thursday, I mean to have you stand behind the door, where the frame of you won't show." And Augusta, on the stairs, had laughed, not cruelly, worse than cruelly, indulgently, the laugh of a mother proud of a clever child, and gone up. The Duchess was in the gallery above and heard all of it, and she looked, for a long moment, at the portrait of the 3rd Duchess of Ravensworth, who had died in 1790 and had family legend held, once horsewhipped a magistrate for turning a tenant family into the snow. And she thought, very well. Not a quiet departure then. Not a note left. And a carriage taken at dawn. They wished to make the girl's whole life into their amusement, in front of an audience. They should have their audience, and the girl's whole life should be answered, in front of it, by mine. No plan, no triumph promised aloud, no flicker of it in her level grey face when she brought Cordelia her chocolate the next morning, only the ledger closed, the accounts squared, and a letter to Ashworth, naming the day. The Thursday of the signing came in hard and bright, the kind of December morning when the frost stays white on the north-facing slates till noon, and the coal smoke stands in the still air over Belgravia like a second, dirtier sky. Number 7 had been made ready for a week. The good silver out, the Sèvres down from the high shelf, the drawing-room warmed since dawn by 2 coal fires, and the crystal lustres of the chandelier washed one drop at a time by Nell Crabtree on the top of a step-ladder, because Cordelia had said the girl might as well be useful at a height where no one had to look at her. The Thorncrofts arrived at 2:15 in a hired landau, the Viscount's crest borrowed for the day on a coach that was not his. Bertram came, and his mother, and a solicitor named Mr. Pratt with a leather case and the manner of a man who charged by the minute. Augusta received them in the hall in dove-grey silk that had cost more than Nell's mother would earn in a decade, and she was, for 1 hour, entirely happy, happier than she had been since her husband died. Since before that, since the mill town of her girlhood where the quality had crossed the street to avoid her father's coal dust, she was about to become the mother of a lady. The front door had opened. She was walking in. Mrs. Hartley served the tea. She did it herself, which was not usual, but Augusta had wanted no untrained hand near the Thorncroft porcelain, and so it was the housekeeper who moved among them with the pot, level and silent, filling cups. And it might all have passed off perfectly, the toasts drunk, the papers signed, Augusta's whole life delivered at last into the shape she had brought it into, had Nell Crabtree not come into the drawing-room at the wrong moment with a fresh scuttle of coal for the dying fire, and had Cordelia not been watching the door. The girl came in with her eyes down, as she had been taught, meaning to feed the fire and vanish. She was 3 steps into the room when Cordelia said, in the bright carrying voice she saved for an audience, "Good God, must that be in here, with people present?" The room went still. Bertram's mother lifted her lorgnette. "I did tell you," Cordelia went on, rising, crossing to the girl, "to keep to the lower passages. Did I not tell you that? Can you not follow so simple an instruction? Or is it that you cannot understand English, being scarcely a step above the animals that pull the coal carts?" She was standing over Nell now, and the room was her theatre, and she played to it. Look at her, the very smell of her. Mother keeps this in the house out of Christian softness, and see how it repays us, dragging the midden into a room where a viscount's family have come to sit. "Cordelia," said Augusta, but weakly, because a part of Augusta was pleased. This was how ladies spoke to servants. Her daughter was performing the accent of the class she had married into, and doing it beautifully, and if the cost was one scullery girl's face, Augusta had long ago decided that faces like that were what such girls were for. Nell had stopped. The scuttle hung from her hand. She was looking at the carpet an Aubusson the Ravensworths had brought back from France before the Sloanes were born, and she was doing the one thing she had learned to do, which was to make herself into a stone and let it wash over her, when Cordelia reached out and took the scuttle from her hand and turned it over. The coal went across the pale carpet in a black spreading fan. Cordelia stepped back from it delicately, the way one steps back from something one has decided not to be responsible for. "Now clean it," she said, "on your knees, in front of these people, so that everyone here understands exactly what you are and exactly what you are worth. £4, is it, that you owe? £4 and some pennies?" She had found this out. Of course she had. "You are not worth 4 pence. You are the cheapest thing in this house, and the sooner you learn to be grateful you are permitted under its roof at all." The Annel knelt. That was the terrible part, the part the Duchess on the landing above had known would come and had let herself watch to the last possible instant. The girl knelt, not because she was told to being told to had never been enough. In 2 years, to bend that particular spine. She had a stubbornness in her that Cordelia had never managed to reach. She knelt because she was tired, and because her mother's cough was worse this winter, and because the tin behind the loose brick held 3 pounds and some shillings, and the 4th pound was the whole of the world, and because a girl who owes £4.11 and 9pence to a Whitechapel moneylender learns, in the end, that dignity is a thing the poor are permitted to keep only so long as it costs them nothing to keep it. And that morning it had begun to cost her the roof. So she went down onto the French carpet among the scattered coal, in front of the Viscount's family and the solicitor and the mistress in her dove-grey silk, and she reached out one blackened hand toward the nearest lump of coal, and Bertram Thorncroft's mother made a small, satisfied sound, the sound of a woman watching the natural order confirm itself, and Cordelia smiled. It was the smile that did it. Up on the landing, unseen, the Duchess of Ravensworth looked down through the balusters at that smile, the smile of a girl who had just made another girl kneel and found it good, and something in her that had held level for 2 years, through every yes, madam, through every docked shilling and swallowed word, went quietly and permanently past its limit. She did not decide to speak. She was simply, suddenly, speaking, and moving down the last of the stairs as she spoke, and her voice when it reached the drawing-room was 2 words only. That is enough. The voice was not loud. That was what stopped the room, not volume, but its absolute lack. A voice pitched exactly as it had been pitched all through the 2 years of yes, madam, and yet entirely changed, because for the first time the level in it was not deference, it was command. Mrs. Hartley set down the teapot on the side table. She did it without haste, without a rattle, the pot meeting the wood in perfect silence, and she straightened, and she looked at Cordelia Sloane across the ruined carpet, and something in the room's air pressure changed. "Take your hands from her," the housekeeper said. Augusta found her voice. "Mrs. Hartley, you forget yourself." "No, madam." She did not turn to Augusta. Her eyes stayed on the daughter. "For 2 years I have not forgotten myself for a single hour. That has been the difficulty." And to Nell, gently now, in the voice she had used in the scullery, "Get up, child. Not on the floor. Not for her. Never for her." Nell got up, and into the silence that followed a silence in which Bertram Thorncroft's mother had frozen with her teacup halfway to her lip, in which Mr. Pratt, the solicitor, had gone very still over his papers, in which Augusta Sloane felt her whole afternoon beginning, somehow, to slide out from under her. Into that silence came, from the frost-bright street below the tall windows, the sound of hooves. Not the trot of a passing hansom, the measured, iron, unhurried walk of a matched pair, drawing something heavy, slowing, stopping, directly before the door of number 7. Everyone in the drawing-room heard it. Nobody moved. A carriage door, a step to the pavement, and then, floating up faint and clear through the cold, the single hard rap of a footman's cane on the front door of the house. Augusta went to the window because she could not help it, and looked down, and made a small sound in her throat. The brougham at the curb was black and immaculate, the kind of carriage that is never hired because the families who own such carriages have owned them longer than the Sloanes had owned money. 2 greys in silver-mounted harness, a coachman and a footman in a livery of dark green and silver, and on the door panel, picked out in gold and unmistakable even from the height of the drawing-room, a coat of arms, a raven, wings displayed, above a coronet. Augusta did not know heraldry. She had tried to learn it out of a book, and it had not stayed, but she knew that coronet had points, and she knew what points meant, and her mouth had gone dry. Below, the front door was opened by the footman, James, who had been drilled all week in how to receive the Thorncrofts, and was entirely unprepared for what he now received. A gentleman of perhaps 60, in a black coat of a cut that made every other coat in the house look like a costume, stepped into the entrance hall, removed his hat, and said, in a voice that carried without effort up the stairwell, and into the drawing-room where they all stood listening, "I am Mr. Ashworth, of Ashworth and Fell, Lincoln's Inn. I am come to attend her Grace, the Duchess of Ravensworth." Kindly inform her I have arrived. The name went through the drawing room like cold water. Ravensworth, the name on the portraits. The name the house had worn before the Sloanes stripped it off. The name that Augusta, in 2 years of living beneath those dark oil faces, had never once thought to wonder about a dead family. She had assumed, gone the way old families went, into the ground and the auction house. There is no, Augusta began, and stopped, because Mrs. Hartley had moved. The housekeeper crossed the drawing room to the tall pier glass beside the fire, and she reached up, and she took the plain white cap from her head. Her hair beneath it was not the grey wisp of a servant's careless bun. It was dressed, had been dressed, all this while, beneath the cap, every morning, out of a habit 40 years deep that no disguise had been able to make her break. She unpinned the darned grey shawl from her shoulders and let it fall over the back of a chair. She drew off the mended cotton gloves, and on the third finger of her right hand, where the glove had hidden it for 2 years, a signet ring caught the firelight, a raven, wings displayed, cut into old gold. She turned to face the room, and she was not a housekeeper. She had never, for 1 hour of those 2 years, been a housekeeper. "You may show Mr. Ashworth up," she said to the footman gaping in the doorway. "I have kept him waiting long enough." No one spoke. Cordelia's mouth was open. Bertram had risen half out of his chair without knowing he had done it, and Augusta Sloane, who had bought this house and everything in it, understood in a rush of horror that she had not bought the one thing that mattered, because it had never been for sale. It had merely been standing in her hall for 2 years in a mended dress, pouring her tea, watching and waiting. "I don't," Augusta's voice cracked. "I don't understand. You are Mrs. Hartley. You are the housekeeper. You answered the advertisement. I answered the advertisement," the woman agreed, "because when a family loses everything but its name, the last thing it will part with is the roof its children were born under. And I wished to know who had taken mine, and what manner of people they were, and how they used those who could not defend themselves." She looked, once, at the coal fanned across the Aubusson carpet, and at Nell standing white-faced against the wall, and something moved in her face that was colder than anger. "I have my answer now. I have had it for some time." Mr. Ashworth came up the stairs. He was an old man, and he came without hurry, and when he reached the drawing-room door, he did not so much as glance at Augusta Sloane in her dove-grey silk, or at Cordelia frozen by the fire, or at the Viscount's family arranged upon the sofa. He crossed the room to the woman by the pier-glass, and he bowed a full bow, the bow a man of his standing gives perhaps twice in his life, and he said, "Your Grace, forgive the delay. The Chancery matter is concluded. Every clause, as you instructed." "Isolde Ravensworth," Augusta whispered. She had gone quite white, the Duchess. "But the family was ruined," everyone said. "The debts, the 10th Duke of Ravensworth was ruined," said the Duchess. "My husband, he gambled the estate into the sea, and drank what was left. And when he had done, he died, and left me a title, a heap of debt, and a great deal of time to think. The debt I have spent 2 years and every remaining resource discharging through Mr. Ashworth, quietly, pound by pound the way, madam, your scullery maid has been discharging hers. It is remarkable how alike the 2 labours are. Only the sums differ. She let that sit. The title I could not lose if I wished to. It is not a thing one can be dispossessed of by a cotton fortune, however large. I remain the Duchess of Ravensworth, and you have been employing me, at £11 a year, to keep your books." Nell Crabtree had not moved from where she stood against the wall. Of everyone in that room she was, in a way, the least surprised and the most undone, because she alone had been shown, on a December night in the scullery, a corner of the truth. She had not known how to read the hand that moved wrong, the words about men who lose 40,000 and dine well the same night, the strange care of a housekeeper who had no reason to care. She looked now at the woman who had told her to keep her tin filled, and her dignity kept, and she understood that she had been spoken to, that whole while, not by a fellow servant offering the cold comfort of the low to the low, but by a duchess, that the one hand in 2 years that had reached toward her instead of down at her had belonged to the highest-born person she would ever stand near, and had reached anyway. Something broke open in the girl's face, not gratitude, or not only, recognition. The particular vertigo of learning that you were seen, all along, by the one person you had been certain could not possibly be looking. And around the doorway, the other servants stood in their own stunned rearrangement of 2 years' understanding. Mrs. Dunmore, the cook, who had brought the housekeeper her supper on a tray 100 nights and thought nothing of it, had a hand pressed to her mouth. James the footman was staring at the signet ring as though it might vanish if he blinked. Prudence, 17 and prone to fancy, had once said over cold mutton that Mrs. Hartley folded a napkin like a lady folds a fan. Had said it as a joke, been told to hush and eat, and now stood white and vindicated and frightened all at once. A girl who had glimpsed the truth and been laughed out of it, and was learning, in this moment, the loneliest lesson the young learn, that being right and being believed are two entirely different fortunes, and that she had had the first without the second, and it had counted for nothing until the truth chose its own hour to arrive. It had chosen it now. The Duchess let the room hold its silence a moment longer, let Augustus Sloane sit inside the full weight of Times at £11 a year, to keep your books Times, and then she turned from the mother and the daughter, as though they had already, in some essential way, ceased to be in the room at all. It was Cordelia who broke. She had watched her mother go white, and she could not bear to follow, and so she did the thing that came most naturally, which was to attack. "This is absurd," she said, too loud. "A trick, some servant's fantasy. Mother, send for a constable, the woman is deranged, playing at being a duchess in her own Miss Sloane." Mr. Ashworth's voice was dry as legal paper. "I am a solicitor of 40 years standing at Lincoln's Inn. The lady before you is Isolde Mary Ravensworth, 10th Duchess of Ravensworth, widow of Edmund Ravensworth, 10th Duke. I have her letters patent, her marriage settlement, and the deed of this house, which she caused to be sold to your late father, with a condition attached that your family's solicitor was too eager or too careless to read closely." He drew a paper from his case. "The sale reserved to the vendor a right of preemption, the right to repurchase, within a term of years, at the original price. Her Grace exercised that right this morning. The house is bought back. You are, as of noon today, guests here, uninvited ones." The silence in the drawing-room was total. Then Bertram Thorncroft's mother set down her teacup, and rose, and said to no one in particular, "I think we had better go." And there it was, the first thread pulled, and the whole garment beginning to run, because the Thorncrofts had come to lend their name to a family with a house in Belgravia and £40,000 to settle a young man's debts, and they were watching that family dissolve in real time into trespassers in a duchess's hall, and a viscount's family, whatever its debts, knows exactly when to leave a sinking thing. "Sit down," said the Duchess. The Viscountess sat down. "You will hear this first, all of you, because you came here to buy breeding, and I think you should see what it is you were purchasing." The Duchess moved to the center of the room, and the coal lay black on the carpet between her and Cordelia, and she did not raise her voice at all. "For 2 years I have kept the books of this house, and I have kept another kind of book besides. I should like to read from it. Nell." The scullery maid started. "Come here. Stand by me. No, do not shrink. You have shrunk enough in this house to last a life. Stand here." And when the girl had come, trembling to her side, the Duchess said to the room, "This is Nell Crabtree. She is 18 years old. She owes £4, 11 shillings, and 9pence to a moneylender in Whitechapel, borrowed to keep her mother from dying of a winter cough. She has repaid it 1 and 6pence at a time, from wages of £6 a year, out of which this household has docked, by my own ledger, £2 and 4 shillings over 18 months for breakages she did not cause and lateness she was not guilty of. Miss Sloane has this morning called her cheaper than 4 pence, and an animal, and made her kneel. Nell, Look at them. You need not ever look at the floor again. Tell them what was said to you on the back stair, the day of the coal in October. Nell's voice, when it came, was barely a thread, but it came. She said, Miss Cordelia said I still smelled of the scullery, and to keep to the lower passages, that I spoiled a room by being in it. And in November, before the Thorncroft cousins, she asked could I read, and said no, one could see it in the vacancy of my face, and there are others in this house who could stand where you stand. The Duchess turned to the door, where the servants had gathered, drawn by the noise, held by the impossibility of it, James and Prudence, and the cook Mrs. Dunmore and 2 housemaids, all of them staring. Prudence, come in. You need not be afraid. I will tell you a secret, which is that they were never as powerful as they persuaded you. Tell the room what Mrs. Sloane said to you in September, when your mother was ill and you asked leave to visit her. Prudence, 17 and shaking, said, she said servants don't have mothers, they have positions, and if I valued the position, I'd forget the mother. Mrs. Dunmore. The matter of the reference. The cook, a heavy woman of 60, who had cooked in that kitchen since before the Sloanes and stayed on because where else does a woman of 60 go, said in a voice thick with something long held down, I asked for a character, Your Grace, to send to my sister's people in Bath, a place for my old age. Mrs. Sloane said she'd write me a character the day I could prove I hadn't been stealing sugar. I never took a grain of sugar in 50 years of kitchens, but there's no proving a thing you never did. She kept me on the hook of it. 2 years. One by one they came. It was not loud and it was not a mob. It was worse than a mob, because it was quiet and it was true. Each small cruelty laid down in the middle of the drawing room like a coin on a counter until there was a heap of them, and Augusta Sloane sat in her dove-grey silk and watched the heap grow, and understood that every one of these people had hated her, silently, for years, while she took their silence for respect. You see, said the Duchess, when they had done, this is the thing that cannot be bought, Mrs. Sloane, and it is the thing you most wanted. You believed that if you treated servants as the quality treat them, you would become the quality. But you mistook the manner for the meaning. The worst of my own class treat servants as you did, I will not pretend otherwise. My late husband was as cruel in his cups as your daughter is sober. But the manner was never what made them ladies and gentlemen. It was an accident that clung to the name. You have bought the accident. You have polished it and worn it and thought yourself arrived. And a scullery maid with £4 of debt and no cap has more of what you were reaching for than you will hold if you live to be 100, because she has never once made a smaller person kneel to feel larger. Cordelia was crying now, ugly and furious. You cannot speak to us so. We have money. We have Bertram. Tell her. But Bertram Thorncroft was looking at the carpet, and his mother was looking at the door, and the engagement that was to have signed itself into being that afternoon was already, everyone in the room understood, as dead as the old Duke. I can speak to you so, said the Duchess, because I am the Duchess of Ravensworth, and this is my house, and you are standing in it uninvited. But I did not come down these stairs to speak to you. I came for her. She put her hand on Nell's shoulder. Mr. Ashworth, Your Grace, Nell Crabtree's debt, £4, 11 shillings, 9 pence. Discharge it in full this afternoon. You have the direction, and enter her, from today, as a member of my household, not scullery. She reads better than Miss Sloane credits. I have heard her, in the pantry, spelling out the newspaper by candle. She will be taught properly. Prudence and Mrs. Dunmore and the rest, any who wish to stay in my service under my terms, which are decent ones, may stay. Any who wish a character to go elsewhere shall have an honest one, written by me, in my hand, which opens doors that Mrs. Sloane's would not. Yes, Your Grace. As for the Sloanes, the Duchess looked at the mother and the daughter, and for a moment the cold in her face gave way to something almost like weariness, almost like pity, and it was more terrible than the cold had been. You have until the end of the week to remove yourselves and your property from my house. Your money is your own. I have not touched it, and I do not want it. But understand what you are taking away with you, because it is more than furniture. By this evening, every drawing room between here and Grosvenor Square will know that the Sloanes kept a duchess as a charwoman for 2 years and never troubled to learn her name, that they were so certain of their own consequence they could not see they were serving quality in their own hall. That story will follow you into every house you hope to enter. You did not need me to ruin you, madam. You have spent 2 years doing it yourselves. I have only stayed to watch, and to keep the books, and to see that when it came, one girl at least was standing on her feet, and not her knees. The Thorncrofts did not stay for the end of it. The Viscountess rose a second time, and this time the Duchess did not stop her, and the family filed out through the hall where James stood holding the door with a face full of wonder past the borrowed landau. Into it. Gone. As she passed the Duchess, the Viscountess paused and dropped, out of some old reflex, older than her own good sense, the smallest of curtsies, before she remembered where she was and what she was fleeing, and hurried on. It was the last courtesy paid inside number 7 that afternoon, and it was not paid to a Sloane. It was Cordelia who tried the last card. She had watched the tribunal with a face that went from fury to fear to something calculating, and when the Thorncrofts had gone and the wreck of the afternoon lay all around her, she crossed the ruined carpet to the Duchess and lowered her voice to a register she must have believed sounded reasonable. "Whatever the sum is," she said, "whatever you were owed, whatever the debt was, my mother has money, real money, more than your family ever. We can settle it, quietly. There is no need for the drawing rooms to hear anything at all. You keep your title and your house, and we pay you handsomely for your discretion." And everyone goes on as though she was actually reaching, as she spoke, for the little chatelaine purse at her waist, as though the thing might be closed here. Now, for banknotes, the way everything in her mother's world had always closed. The Duchess looked at the purse, and then at the girl's face, and what crossed her own was not anger. It was recognition, and it was the coldest thing in the whole cold afternoon. "You truly believe," she said slowly, "that this can be bought, that I stood 2 years in your hall for want of a price you had not yet named?" She shook her head once. "That is the whole of your education, Miss Sloane, laid out in a single gesture. You reaching for your purse in a duchess's drawing room. Certain the reaching is enough, because it has always been enough, because your father's money crossed every street your father was ever refused. Put it away. There is a thing you cannot buy, and you have just proved, one final time, that you cannot even see it well enough to know what it is you are failing to purchase. No settlement, no discretion. The drawing rooms will hear all of it, because a girl was made to kneel in this room, and the answer to that is not a private check. It is a public accounting. Put your purse away and go and pack." Cordelia's hand fell from the purse. For one moment, the only moment in the whole story when she came near to understanding something like real fear, not of ruin but of a world in which her one certainty did not hold, moved behind her eyes. Then it closed over, the way it always closed over in her, into grievance, into the conviction that she had merely been unlucky in her enemy. She turned on her heel and went, and her mother went after her, and the drawing room was left to the Duchess and the servants and the coal-fanned black across 300 years of French weaving. They were gone by Saturday. It did not take the end of the week. Augusta had thought it would, had thought she would gather her dignity and her household's goods and depart in her own good time. But a house turns on you faster than that, when its truth changes underneath it. The tradesman knew by Friday morning. The butcher's boy who came to the area door with the Saturday joint came instead with a note from the butcher, regretting that his account with the Sloane household must be settled and closed. A shop that has heard a story does not extend credit to the losing side of it. The dressmaker in South Moulton Street, who had been altering Cordelia's trousseau, sent the half-finished gowns back in a box with her bill and no letter. Invitations that had been merely slow to arrive now definitively did not arrive, and the Thorncrofts, who had, after all, £40,000 of reasons to marry money and could not afford to be particular found within a fortnight another heiress, a brewer's daughter from Staffordshire, whose family had at least had the sense to learn who they were serving before they served them, and Bertram Thorncroft married her in the spring and never spoke of Wilton Crescent again. The story travelled the way such stories travel, which is faster than any post. By that first evening, it had reached the house 3 doors down, where Augusta had been civiled off the lawn 18 months before, and the Countess, who had looked away from the 11-guinea parasol, now had the finest possible reason to have done so, and told the tale at her own dinner that night, with the particular pleasure of a woman whose small unkindness has been retroactively proven wisdom. By the end of the week, it was in Grosvenor Square and Eaton Place, and the clubs off St. James's, and it had acquired, as travelling stories do, its perfect shape, the shape that would outlast every fact in it. 2 years. Poured the woman's tea 2 years. And Augusta Sloane, if you please, complaining all the while that she could not get her char to hold a cup properly, the char being the Duchess of Ravensworth, who has held rather better cups than anything in the Sloane pantry. It was unfair in its details. As the best gossip always is, Augusta had not, in fact, complained about the tea, but it was true in the only way that mattered to the drawing-rooms, which was that it confirmed what they had always wished to believe about new money, that it could buy the house and the silver and the season's box at the opera, and would still, always, at the crucial moment, fail to see the one thing a person of breeding would have seen without looking. The Sloanes had proven the whole comfortable prejudice of the aristocracy correct, and the aristocracy rewarded them for it with a laughter that did not stop for years. Augusta took a house in Bayswater, which is a respectable district, and was, to a woman who had reached for Belgravia, a kind of daily small death. She had her money still, every pound of it. The Duchess had not lied about that, and had not touched it. But money, Augusta was learning, is a strange possession. It can buy the house, and the carriage, and the good silver, and it cannot buy back a name once the name has become a joke. And by that winter the name of Sloane had become, in the drawing-rooms where Augusta had longed to be received, exactly the kind of joke that is repeated with pleasure. You have heard about the Sloanes? Kept a duchess scrubbing their floors for 2 years. 2 years. Poured Augusta Sloane's tea every afternoon, and the woman never once wondered why her char had a lady's hands. It was told at dinners. It was told with relish. It clung. Cordelia married, in the end, a solicitor's clerk with prospects, which was a match her mother had once have thought beneath contempt, and by then thought a mercy. She was not, whatever else, stupid. She understood what had happened to her, understood it more clearly than her mother ever would, and the understanding did not soften her. It hardened her. She had learned the wrong lesson twice now: first, that cruelty was breeding, and then that the cruelty had cost her everything. And rather than conclude that the cruelty was the error, she concluded only that she had been caught, and she carried that grievance into her small marriage in her small house, and was, by every account, a difficult woman to the end of her days, quick to remind a housemaid of her place, watchful always for the smaller person she could stand upon to feel tall. Some people the fall improves, some it only teaches to fall more carefully. Cordelia was the second kind, and there is no story that can make her the first, and it would be a lie to pretend otherwise. At number 7, meanwhile, the coal was cleaned from the Aubusson carpet, and the house began, slowly, to become itself again. The Duchess had not, in truth, a great fortune left. That was the thing the servants had not understood and now learned, that her 2 years below stairs had not been entirely a masquerade. She was genuinely, if not desperately, poor, in the particular way that grand old families are poor, land-rich once, and now not even that, holding a great name and a repurchased house, and very little to run it on. But there is a difference between the poverty of the Ravensworths and the poverty of the Crabtrees, and the Duchess knew it better than anyone, and she spent a good part of that first winter making sure the household she now kept did not forget the difference in the wrong direction. She kept the staff small and paid them properly and on time. She wrote Mrs. Dunmore the honest character the cook had wanted for 2 years, and Mrs. Dunmore, having read it and wept over it, decided she did not want to go to Bath after all, and stayed. She took Nell Crabtree in hand personally. The girl could read, as the Duchess had said. What she could not do was believe she was permitted to, and that took longer to mend than the reading. By the following autumn, Nell was keeping the household accounts under the Duchess's eye, in a clear round hand, and her mother's cough had been seen by a real physician the Duchess sent and paid for, and her brother, the wheelwright's apprentice, had a small sum settled quietly on his indentures, so that he would finish them a journeyman and not a beggar. The Duchess did one thing more. That first spring, which the servants talked of for years, she had the Ravensworth portraits taken down from the long gallery, the dark oil faces that had watched the whole 2 years, the dead dukes and duchesses in their coronets, and she had them cleaned and rehung, and among them, at the end of the row, in a plain frame she paid for herself, she hung a small framed page. It was not a portrait. It was a single sheet of paper, the moneylender's receipt for Nell Crabtree's debt, £4, 11 shillings, and 9pence, marked P.A.D. in full, in the Duchess's own hand, dated the day of the coal. When the new housemaid asked, as new housemaids always did, why a scrap of paper hung among the noble dead, the Duchess would say, if she happened to be passing, and she often arranged to be passing, that it was the most valuable thing in the gallery. And when the girl looked doubtful, she would add, every face on this wall was born to a coronet. Not one of them earned it. That paper was earned, 1 shilling and 6pence at a time, by a girl who owed more than she could carry, and carried it anyway. When you have decided which is the harder thing to do, you will know whether you are in service to a great family or a good one, and I should like this house, from now on, to be the second. She began, too, though it took some years to grow into anything, a small fund. Nothing grand, she had not the means for grand. It paid the debts of servant girls. That was all. A domestic in a good house, who fell into the kind of trap Nell had fallen into, the sick mother, the moneylender, the sum that grew faster than the wages could feed it could apply, quietly, through Mr. Ashworth. And if the case was honest, the debt was paid, on the single condition that the girl, once on her feet, contribute 1 shilling when she could toward the next girl's rescue. It had no name for a long while. The servants called it the Duchess's tin, after the tin behind the loose brick where Nell had hidden her £3, and the name stuck and outlived the Duchess, and there were girls kept off the streets of London by the Duchess's tin, who never knew there had been a Duchess at all, or a scullery, or a Saturday in December when a family lost everything they had not troubled to understand, they never owned. There was no knight in this story, no steward galloping up the drive, no last-minute rescue by a stronger hand. That is the thing this story does not have, and its absence is the whole of its meaning. Nobody rode in to save the Duchess of Ravensworth. She saved herself, over 2 years, in a mended grey dress, with a ledger and a signet ring hidden inside a cotton glove, and a patience her whole ruined class had never taught her, and her ruin finally did. And she saved Nell Crabtree, not with a title or a fortune, she was short of both, but with £4, 11 shillings, and 9pence, and the refusal, single and quiet and immovable, to let a girl kneel on a floor so that a smaller woman might feel tall. The 2 women met once more, years afterward, and it is worth the telling, because it is the truest measure of the distance between them. It was the spring of 1878, in Whiteley's, the great new emporium in Bayswater, where the whole of that comfortable, striving, second-rank district went to shop. The Duchess was there on some errand of the household buying, in fact, a length of good plain cloth for Nell, who was to be married that summer to the journeyman wheelwright who had been her brother's master, a decent man with steady hands. And coming the other way along the counter, in a bonnet a season out of fashion and a manner grown careful in a way it had never been careful in Belgravia, was Augusta Sloane. They saw each other. There was no avoiding it, and no scene. Augusta stopped, the Duchess stopped, and for a moment the whole long story hung between them across a counter of ribbons in a Bayswater shop. "Your Grace," Augusta said at last. She had learned, at least, to say it. 6 years in Bayswater had taught her the words her 2 years in Belgravia had not. Mrs. Sloane. That was all it needed to be. But Augusta, who had had 6 years to think and no one to think it to, said the thing she had perhaps come 3 times to that shop hoping to say. I did not know you. All that while. I never once, she stopped. My daughter says I am a fool to mind it still. That it is done. But I find I do mind it. Not the ruin, the not knowing, that you were there, and I looked straight through you every day, and I never saw a thing. The Duchess considered her. She might have been cruel. She had earned the right to be, and a smaller woman would have taken it. She was not cruel, but she was not kind in the way Augusta was reaching for, either the way that would have said times it is forgotten, it is nothing, we are quits. Because it was not nothing, and they were not quits, and the Duchess did not lie. You did not look through me because I was disguised, Mrs. Sloane, she said. The disguise was thin. Any one of your own servants could have told you my hands were wrong, and one of them did tell your daughter, and your daughter laughed. You looked through me because I was a housekeeper, and you had decided long before you ever came to Wilton Crescent that housekeepers were things a room contained, and not people a room held. That is why you did not see me. And it is why, in the end, you did not get the thing you crossed all of England to buy. You cannot enter the world of people who hold rooms while you still believe that the people serving in them do not fully exist. The two beliefs cannot live in the same head. I could have told you that for nothing, any afternoon, over the tea I poured you. You would not have heard it. I am not certain you hear it now. Augusta was quiet. Then she said, No, perhaps not. But I heard it a little, and she inclined her head, not a curtsy. She had not the standing for a curtsy, and they both knew it, but a bow of sorts, an acknowledgement, and she went on down the counter, and the Duchess bought the cloth for Nell's wedding, and that was the last the two women ever had to do with one another. Nell was married that June from number 7 itself. The breakfast laid in the very drawing-room where she had once been made to kneel. She stood under the Ravensworth portraits in a gown of that good plain cloth, and the Duchess gave her away, there being no father to do it, and the framed receipt still hung at the end of the gallery, £4.11 and 9pence, paid in full, and Nell touched the frame of it once, in passing, on her way in the way another bride might touch a rosary or a grave. The years went on. The Duchess never grew rich. Rosemere in Surrey she nursed slowly back from ruin, farm by farm, and it kept her in the modest dignity that was all she had ever wanted back, which was less than she had been born to, and enough. She was known, in the end, to two entirely separate worlds, who never quite understood they were speaking of the same woman, to the drawing-rooms as the Duchess of Ravensworth, an old name recovered against the odds, and to a quiet network of servant girls across London through a fund with no proper name, as the source of a mercy that arrived by way of a solicitor at Lincoln's Inn precisely when the moneylender's patience ran out. She would have preferred, had she been made to choose, to be remembered by the second world, but she was not, in the main, remembered by either, which is the ordinary fate of quiet people who spend their lives making other lives possible, and she knew it, and it did not trouble her. She had not done any of it to be remembered. There is a thing worth saying plainly here, because the shape of the story might otherwise smooth it over. The Duchess of Ravensworth was not a good woman by nature, if by nature we mean easily or from the first. She had been raised in the same gilded contempt that produced her husband, taught the same lessons, given the same permission to look through the people who served her. As a young duchess in the years of her marriage, she had, by her own later admission to no one but her ledger, been careless with servants, in exactly the ordinary way of her class, not cruel like Cordelia, but unseeing, which is cruelty's quieter cousin. What changed her was not virtue, it was the fall. It was 2 years of standing where the unseen stand, of being looked through by a cotton widow, of learning from the inside what it is to be a thing a room contains, and not a person a room holds. The ruin that stripped her of her fortune gave her, in its place, the one education her wealth had carefully kept from her, and she was clear-eyed enough to know it, and to know that had Edmund Ravensworth not drunk the estate into the sea, she might have gone to her grave a perfectly pleasant, perfectly blind duchess who would have walked past Nell Crabtree on 100 stairs and never once seen her at all. That is not a flattering thing to know about oneself. She knew it anyway. It was, perhaps, the truest measure of what she had become, that she could look at the woman she would have been and not forgive her. She had done it, in the end, because a girl had knelt on a floor, and she had been standing on the landing above, and she had decided, not that day, but over 2 slow years of deciding, out of a ruin that had taught her the only lesson worth the price, that she would not go up the stairs and leave her there. So here is the whole of it, if you want the shape of the thing plain. A woman lost everything the world can take her fortune, her house, her husband, her station, and kept the one thing the world cannot reach, which is not a title and not a name and not even pride, but the plain refusal to become small by making others smaller. She wore that refusal for 2 years under a mended cap in her own lost house, and when the moment came she did not raise her voice, and she did not raise her hand, and she brought a whole gilded family down with nothing but the truth, patiently kept and quietly told. The Sloanes had gold enough to buy a duchess's house and a viscount's son. They could not buy the one coin that mattered, and they could not even see it in their own hall, glinting on the 3rd finger of the woman who poured their tea. A title can be sold at auction. Contempt is cheap, and anyone may afford it. But the thing that outlasts a great name, the thing that hangs, in the end, in a plain frame among the coroneted dead, is only ever earned £4 and 11 shillings and 9pence at a time. Disclaimer: this story is entirely fictional and created with the assistance of AI for entertainment purposes only. It is set against a Victorian-era backdrop for dramatic effect and does not claim historical accuracy in every detail. It does not refer to, represent, or target any real individual, family, title, or estate, living or deceased. Any resemblance to actual persons or events is purely coincidental. If this story moved you, tell me below. What would you have done, standing on that landing, watching a girl made to kneel? Would you have gone up the stairs and left her there, or would you have set down the teapot? Share your thoughts on what true dignity costs and where you are watching from tonight.